Welcome, dear listeners, to Broadcasts from Elsewhere. I'm your host, Enigma, and we are once again back at it with our No Way November today. We have about 4 more episodes in total for you, so I hope you're enjoying this. Today's film comes from 1990. It's called Frankenhooker. It is obviously a Frankenstein-inspired movie about a man who tries to bring back his girlfriend using the parts of sex workers. He has her head, and that's about it. Now, there's not a lot to say about the movie prior. I initially thought it was made by Trauma Team. It turns out it's just been distributed by the Trauma Team. Trauma Team is a rather famous, or maybe infamous, depending on where you stand, group in the horror area. They produce and distribute a lot of horror films, and they're pretty much known for having like very offensive content in them, you know, like very offensive jokes or just anything like that, and being like overly sexualized and whatnot too as well. Which I will say, even though this one was not made by Trauma, it still kind of has like the trademark feel to it in a way, but not nearly as much so. And if you ever watch something that's more Trauma, like original, you'll know. There is one thing you might recognize from Trauma. Their most famous film would be The Toxic Avenger, which got its own series, its own movie series, 4 films, and even a kid-friendly cartoon series. I'll probably have to cover Toxie and all that in another one of these episodes, but that's another time. But today I wanted to talk about Frankenhooker. This one is pretty wild, I'll admit. I will say, if you want to check this out beforehand, it is of course free to watch on Tubi. It is not too bad a film. It is rated R though, so just be aware of that. There's a lot of nudity. I mean, I guess you should probably expect that with a title like Frankenhooker, but it is mostly just boobs and butts. You won't really see any genitals, so if you don't like genitals, don't worry, there's not going to be any. It's just mostly just boobs and butts. And, like, yeah, it's not anything too crazy. But of course, just, if you want to check it out, go right ahead. Just know you're going to see a lot of female nudity and, of course, severed limbs and other body parts, because, again, this is a Frankenstein-inspired story. Rather loosely, but regardless, you know the drill. But anyways, that's enough of an intro there, I believe. Let's go ahead and get into our plot. Spoilers ahead. We open on Jeffrey, our main protagonist here. Jeffrey Franken is his name. There's actually a couple Easter eggs there with his name and his girlfriend's name. Jeffrey's last name is Franken, like Frankenstein, and then his girlfriend is named Elizabeth Shelley, just like Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. Just a little fun fact there, I thought. Anywho, we open on Jeffrey. He's messing around with one of his experiments. It's a brain in a jar that he has that he's basically been keeping alive in this jar of fluid. This brain has an eyeball also in the center of the brain. There's just a human eyeball just there. It doesn't have eyelids or anything, it's just a single ball. Anyways, he can't seem to get the eye to actually work, like to move, as he keeps trying to get it to follow his finger and everything is not working. This part was... I wasn't expecting this to work, but somehow this works. He shoves a scalpel in its brain and just kind of like wiggles it around a bit, and then tries the eye test to get it, and it starts working. It's like, I don't think that's how biology works, but sure, why not? Then we have a lady come into the room, and she asks him for some ketchup, because for some reason there is ketchup on his table that he's working on, and we'll understand why in a second here. But he goes ahead and hands it to her, and you see the lady grab some plates and some sodas and stuff, and it turns out he's been doing this whole experiment thing in the kitchen, in his in-laws' kitchen, while they're having a cookout for his father-in-law. See, because it's his father-in-law's birthday, so they had a little cookout, you know? Can you imagine if you fucking had a son-in-law and he's just working on a fucking living brain in your kitchen while you're having a birthday party? It's actually kind of a cool thing, actually, in my opinion, but it'd still be kind of weird. Anyway, the lady who came in to get the ketchup, we find out that's his mother-in-law. So she goes outside to the cookout with all her things that she grabbed, the plates and whatnot, and lets Elizabeth know what Jeffrey's doing in the kitchen. She doesn't seem too bothered by this at all, but anyways, so Elizabeth starts talking to one of her friends, and we learn through some exposition here, basically, through her speaking to her friend, that Jeff is an electrician. He works for New Jersey Electric Company, but that he could have been a doctor because he has the know-how to do, he has the biology knowledge, basically, but he keeps getting kicked out of medical schools, apparently. So she grabs him out from the kitchen, tells him, let's go outside and celebrate, you know? So we see her dad blow out the candles and everything, and then it's hers and Jeff's turn to give her dad his present for his birthday. And what they've gotten him is this souped-up lawnmower. It looks like one of those old-school, push mowers with the spiral blade, but apparently Jeffrey took it and just, pimped it out, basically, and made it to where now it's remote control and you can just make it do the work for you, basically. So she shows off that, and then she grabs the remote and she's like, here, let me show you how it works. And she stands in front of the fucking machine. She stands in front of the lawnmower. It's like, here, let me show you how this works. And she's like, you press this button to turn it on, and you press this button to make it go forward or whatever, and then it just runs her ass over and shreds her up. We don't get to see that, though. It just does it off screen. It's, but it's implied, and it is confirmed later. So we flash forward, and we see Jeff. He's got a big diagram laid out, and it's of the muscular system, and it's a female muscular system. He's to the top of the diagram, he taped his girlfriend's photo. It's so strange. But he's making notes all over the diagram about how much voltage to put in this area and whatnot. And he even mentions if I use this much here, I can get rid of those varicose veins. Oh, if I do this here, I can get rid of this mole. It's like, what the fuck, man? It's just crazy, because you also find out later all he has is her head. So how are you going to fix all these different things? Because he's circling her arm and her leg and all this stuff on the diagram. It's you can't change those things because you don't have those parts to change. But either way. But while he's doing all this research to find out, to take notes, to find out what he needs to do, he realizes he'd be causing a brownout with all the electricity he needs, so he decides to take his mind off of this, I suppose, and pops in a VHS that shows a news report on her death, because that's his healthy coping mechanism, just watching your partner's news story about how they were brutally killed by their own stupidity. Yeah. And of course, in this interview, we do find out that several of her body parts did go missing. I think he actually does have an arm as well, but he only puts her head onto the body later, so I don't know. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make sense, right? Anyways, Jeff's mom comes into the room because it turns out he moved back in with his mother now, and she's upset that he keeps watching this tape, and she wants to move on. And honestly, based, because he needs to move on. It has been, I don't know how long did they say, actually? I think it's been at least a year, if I'm not mistaken. So it's been long enough. And he's still hung up on it. And it's I get it. You're grieving and stuff. But you're also not doing it in a healthy way because you're trying to bring her back. But she offers to set him up with somebody. And she also tells him that he needs to go to medical school, but he doesn't want to. We also see he still has the brain from the beginning of the movie in this little fish tank, and it's full of purple liquid. We find out later that this liquid is an estrogen-based blood serum, whatever the fuck that means. And apparently he can use it to keep body parts alive, so that they can be used to be transferred onto, other body parts for the Frankenstein type experiments that he wants to do. So, after his mom leaves, we have a very odd scene where he takes her head out of the fluid because he has her in a separate tank. It's like the brain is in a fish tank, but her head is in a different container. It's basically like one of those stand-up freezers that you can get, but it's filled with the purple goo, the blood serum, as he says. Anywho, he takes her head out of that, and he puts it on the table with him and has dinner with it. He even tries to give it some wine. It's kind of disturbing in a way, but then he starts showing off different centerfold models to the head and tells her, like, what do you think about this body? You can have a body like this. What about this body? And so on and so forth. And so apparently that's his idea, is he wants to give her a brand new body, which of course makes sense because he only has a few pieces. But he only uses the head once again, which is I don't understand why. Anywho, we then see a weather report showing that there's going to be a large lightning storm in the next 2 days. So Jeff decides, rather than causing a brownout for the city, he could just use the lightning to revive her. So he decides he has to get parts for her within the 2 days. So he starts pacing around trying to figure out what the fuck to do. And this is the part where this part got me right here. Is he goes over to a diagram of a brain and he looks around at it for a second. He's like, okay, I need this area. And he takes out a drill, like a handyman drill, and just holds it up to the back of his skull and drills into his own skull, presumably hitting the nerve or whatever area of the brain he was pointing out on the diagram. This somehow calms him down and helps him think. So he does that, and he finally decides, sex workers are already selling their body in a way, so why don't I just use their bodies, is what he says basically. So he decides to go downtown. He goes to New York to get some sex workers. So he goes down to New York and he talks to some people, some ladies on the street there. At first, there's one lady who's like really ready and eager to go with him because he flashes this big wad of cash at her. But then he tells her, like, oh, I need like 6 or 7 girls. And so they tell him, like, well, you'll have to take it up with the pimp. They take him to go see their pimp, and the pimp arranges for him to have ladies in a hotel room, but he has to pick one woman. He gets 30 minutes with the different ladies, but he has to pick just one to, do the deed with. But we all know that Mr. Jeff here isn't for that, so while he's with the pimp, he also buys some crack off of him, the smoking kind, just to be clear. So he takes this crack home, and he does something to it in his laboratory and turns it into what he calls super crack. I'm not even kidding, that is what he calls it. While he's making this, he's watching this interview piece from this lady where she's trying to help get sex work legalized, basically, and get it regulated and legalized so that the girls aren't dying in the streets and whatnot. And she literally says something about that they're dying from all the crack that's on the streets and whatnot. And Jeff's like, you're damn right, but you know what? This will get it done quicker, this super crack. Yeah, so basically his idea is to use this super crack, as he calls it, to kill the sex workers, painlessly in his eyes. So painlessly kill them, so that he could then harvest their parts and use them to rebuild his girlfriend. As he's watching the program a bit after finishing up his thing, he kind of hallucinates and he thinks he can hear Liz calling out to him, so he has to go for his drill again. It's just so weird because you can see he already has a hole in his head, because this time he drills in a different area, and he drills right below his ear, right below his earlobe. You can see a freaking hole in his cheek. He's done this several times, basically. So he does that and he calms himself down finally. And then he goes ahead and he has a literal guinea pig that he tries the super crack on. He takes one of those little, I forget what they're called, but it's the little pumping things. Either way, he is able to turn the into a vapor and goes ahead and pumps it into the guinea pig's cage. And after a few moments in there, the guinea pig explodes after inhaling enough of the super crack. So he starts to feel a little bit like he maybe shouldn't be doing this because he doesn't want to just blow up a bunch of people, you know. But he goes ahead and goes to the hotel room to meet all the ladies. And while there, he goes ahead and he plays doctor, as they say on the movie. And he starts taking measurements of various body parts. Like he takes the volume of one of their breasts, he freaking like measures their legs, measures their butts and whatnot. He puts like check marks on anything that he likes, basically, so that he knows to keep it. And after a little montage of doing that, they tell him like, hey, you've only got like a couple more minutes, you gotta pick now. And he finally like cracks and tells them like, I can't do this, I can't go through with this. And of course they start like, well, are we gonna get paid? Like, you know, what the fuck? So he throws them, he has a doctor bag, he throws them the money, or he throws them the doctor bag, and they open it. One of them opens it and she finds an envelope. She starts counting the money and everything. Then she looks back inside again and she finds his bag of super crack because he brought it with him. Despite not wanting to use it, he brought it with him. So they take that out and they start fighting over it with like tug of war style, and eventually they all just get out their crack pipes and they just start smoking it like crazy. Like they have a few of the girls sitting on top of him so he can't stop them from smoking it, and they all just sort of like dance around, cheering and yelling and just like inaudibly, like you can't understand what the hell they're doing. They're just like, yeah, woo, or whatever. Basically, it's like the most basic form of cheering possible. But eventually, as they're dancing and cheering and whatnot, they all just start to explode. And I gotta say, the effects on this part were fucking hilarious, because you can clearly see that they just would sub in a mannequin body every time a person needed to explode. So it'll be a person. Like it'll be a person there, like dancing around, moving, and then suddenly it'll just like in a freaking second, it's just a mannequin standing there, and boom, it blows up. It does this for every single girl. It's so fucking great. But you can even see the stuffing coming out of some of their stomachs, like if they were using cloth mannequins for a couple of them, I assume. And you can see like the freaking stuffing just spilling out of their torso as they explode. So Zorro, their pimp, comes back up to check on them because he hears all the screaming and the explosions. So he tries to knock on the door, no one answers, of course, so he starts to break down the door. And right as he's able to get the door broken in, one of the last girl explodes and her head flies up and hits him in the forehead and knocks him out cold. So then we just have Jeff. He's standing in the aftermath here, and he's like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, girls, I'll put you all back together, I promise, he tells them. And then he gets a couple of garbage bags and just stuffs the body parts in those. I think it's the funniest thing, because he drives them back home, and when he gets back home, he opens the trunk, and you can see like a freaking arm hanging out of the bag. You can see like a head at the top of one of the bags too. It's like, wow, very conspicuous, Jeff. Very good job. No one will ever know what's in those bags. But regardless, he takes him inside, and he starts to assemble the body, like we see him later that day. This is a little time skip, and he starts to piece together all the pieces so that he can put together her body. He has this like paste thing that he uses to attach the body parts. I don't know if it's just temporarily, because he does also stitch them, as you can see, like on the body it's stitched together. But he takes this like purple paste, it's almost like it's epoxy or some shit, and rubs it on the arm socket and just slaps it into the torso, and it just stays there. And it's like, okay, sure, why not? And then after he slaps it on there, he freaking takes a welding torch and just welds it to her. So I guess that's how he's doing it. It's welded on. But it's still kind of fucking crazy. Anyways, the rest of them go inside. The rest of the parts all go into the container where Liz's head was. And he takes Liz's head out as well. So all the body parts are in the goo right now, so he can use them later. Then he takes Liz's head out, and he attaches her head and lifts, and we see him lift the platform into the sky, because he has like, his roof can open up, like it's got like mechanized doors. So his roof is opened up, the storm is beginning to start, and he raises the platform up into the sky with a lightning rod attached to it. After a few moments in the sky, the lightning rod is struck, and he brings the body back down. When he brings it back down, the woman is now standing up, still under the sheet, but standing up. So you get like a little ghost sheet looking thing, basically. He takes the sheet off of her, and she does not recognize him at all. But she does apparently know that she is a sex worker, because she just starts screeching out, "You want a date? Need some company?" And basically just like trying to get him to, you know, buy her services. And he tells her, it's like, "Well, I don't have any money." And she slaps his ass so hard that he just fucking knocks the fuck out. And then she walks away. She slapped him across the face so damn hard that he just got knocked out. That's impressive to me. So she storms off, and she goes to the subway train. Everyone's all like afraid to see her and shit, but she takes the subway down to New York. Meanwhile, we also see, as she storms out, the freezer container starts to shake around, and we can hear like some muffled like screaming and yelling. So it seems that the girls are still alive inside the goo, which makes sense because it is what his serum is supposed to do. It's supposed to preserve the parts, so I guess it preserves them well enough to where they're still alive, apparently. So she heads to New York, and she's in Times Square, and she keeps asking people, like, you know, if you want a date, you want some company. She eventually finds one guy, this short, balding fat man, who agrees to go with her and pay her. So while they're heading back to the hotel room, Jeff comes to finally, and he realizes that she's left, so he runs off to find her, because he figures, like, well, she just thinks she's a hooker, so she must be, you know, she must be down there trying to sell herself again. So he runs off to Times Square as well. Then we get to see her and the fat man. They go to the same exact hotel where Jeff was doing all the measurements earlier with the girls, and she keeps, while she's like, talking, she never says anything like original. She only spouts other lines that the other sex workers had said earlier in the film. So like, she'll just start like randomly saying lines like they were saying earlier when they were doing the whole measurement scene. So when they get into the hotel room, she's just like, "This is Jeffrey. He wants to play doctor," which is how one of the sex workers introduced Jeff when he was supposed to do the measurements. And the fat guy doesn't think any much of this. He's just like, "Oh wow, yeah, I like the idea of that. Let's role play. I'll be the doctor and you be my patient," or something like that. So they both start to strip down, and they don't get fully nude. So he's in his boxers and like a wife beater type t-shirt, and she's just in her like lingerie basically. And she gets on top of him, and she does like a writing motion as if she's writing him, but she's not, because he doesn't have anything out. Like, she's basically just dry humping him, I guess. And she starts like moaning and stuff, but then she grabs his head while she's doing this, like grabs his neck rather, and he basically gets, she somehow is able to electrocute him with, I guess, whatever electricity is still in her body basically. So she zaps the fuck out of him and he explodes. We cut to a POV shot of her holding his head. He just like, he's somehow still alive as just a head, and he goes, "Wow, that was amazing." It's just so fucking great. Then we get to see that Jeff is in Times Square now, and he keeps asking everyone, like, "Have you seen this woman? Have you seen this woman? Have you seen this woman?" Because he needs to find her, like, right now. But Liz takes the money from the dead man's wallet, and she goes ahead and leaves the hotel room. As she's walking down the hallway, she sees this other guy. He stops her, and he tries to, like, accost her, basically. And he starts to make out with her, and after he makes out with her for like just a few seconds, he gets electrocuted and explodes as well, and she takes his head and just tosses it out the fucking window into the trash can. So fucking great. So she wanders down the street and she ends up at the club where Zorro stays. It's the same club where Jeff went to ask for the girls and to buy the crack earlier in the movie. But she goes up to the bar and is talking to some people, but she's just doing the same thing again, repeating the lines from the earlier that night. Zorro had a buddy he was talking to about like, hey, I lost to my hose, basically says, you know, and the guy's well, tough shit. And his friend sees, you know, Frankenhooker walk in, so he goes over to her and tries to hit on her and stuff, and they go to a booth alone and stuff. And Zorro can overhear them, like he can hear them, or hear her mostly, talking about, or repeating the lines rather, from last night again. He knows there's something going on, right? Because he can tell something's wrong, because like, one of the lines that she says is like, oh, Zorro said you have 30 minutes, you better choose one. Something like that, you know? And so, anyways, the other guy takes her to the booth, and he tries... God. He gets all, like, hot and bothered, and he starts going down on her. So he's down there, like, trying to eat her out, right? And he starts to get electrocuted, and explodes. A real death by snoo type of shit, I swear. Anyways, so after seeing that, Zorro comes over and he demands to know who she is because he sees on her arm that she has a signature tattoo that all of his hoes had, basically. It's just a Z inside of a circle. So he demands to know who she is, but she won't answer. And he eventually gets really physical and he punches her. And her head like snaps almost all the way off. So she's just hanging on literally by a thread, basically. And it just starts to have like electricity just shoots out of her neck. But Jeff comes in right on time here. He runs in, he sees her, he puts her head back down on top of her neck, like holds it there, and runs her back to his car. Zorro silently follows them, and he hails a cab and has it follow them so that he can catch up. So Jeff is able to get them back to his place. He reattaches her head and puts like metal staples in her head and some bolts as well. Then he uses some electricity to revive her. And now when she comes to, she's Elizabeth again. She remembers who she is and everything. She's of course taken aback to see that she doesn't have the correct parts, because she looks down and she's like, this is not my arm, this is not my hand, this is not my boobs, or something like that, you know? So he explains to her, like, yeah, you died, but I brought you back. And she's like, well, this is amazing, we have to present this to some scientific reporters and we could save some people's lives. But it's here that we learned that his blood serum is estrogen based, as I mentioned earlier. He can only keep women's body parts alive, so he can't use it on men. But while they're still talking, Zorro comes in. He sneaks in, rather, and he grabs this huge knife off the operating table. And I don't know what it's supposed to be. I assume maybe it looked like a freaking machete almost, but like really thin. So who knows, I suppose. But anyways, so he grabs that and he sneaks up while they're talking and he slices Jeff's head clean off. And then he turns to Elizabeth and he tries to convince her or force her to work for him because he knows that she has parts of his girls in her because of the tattoo from earlier. He grabs his big bag of crack and he tries to like be like, yeah, you know you want to work for me, I've got crack. It's so dumb. But him waving around the crack, I guess, wakes up the body parts inside the little goo chamber. So the little chamber just starts to vibrate and shake, and it falls over, And everything spills out, all the parts, all the fluid and everything. And somehow the body parts have reconnected to each other, but in odd ways. It was kind of like watching like those, like it was kind of like watching Sid's toys from Toy Story, because they're all just like all fucked up. Like there's one that's an upside down torso that walks on its hands, but it has a mouth on its crotch, like in place of genitals. It just has a mouth. And then there's another one that's a head that's connected to 2 arms and 2 legs. It has no torso or nothing else. It's just a head and some limbs. And it crawls around like a freaking spider, basically. And there are some arms that are just attached. They're just fused to a head. Like they're just like fused. Like imagine an arm. Imagine arms if they came out of your ears, basically. That's what it's like on this other one. So those are a few of them that we see. So all of these monsters come out and they start attacking Zorro, and they knock him down and drag him into the container and close the door. So Liz just kind of watched all that happen, which is like, well, anyways, and picks up Jeff's head, and she sees his notes and she knows exactly what to do. So then we get a POV shot of a little bit later where Jeff is waking up now after being revived. So she went ahead and she's able to revive him. And as they're talking, the camera starts to zoom out slowly, and we can see that Jeff's head is, of course, on a woman's body. And Liz explains, of course, hey, your serum only works on female bodies. And I couldn't use your body, and I couldn't use Zorro's body, because Zorro's apparently dead. Got killed by those monsters, apparently. Makes sense. So he's like, well, I couldn't use his body, and I couldn't use your body, so I did the next best thing, and I put you on this woman's body. She says that she still loves him just like this, but he is just at a loss for words, and he just keeps like screaming and like in horror and stuff. And roll the credits. That's it. It's a wild fucking ride, I swear. Like, I did not expect to go there. Like, the freaking monster girls really threw me for a loop, I gotta say, because I did not see that coming. Especially because, like, how the fuck they just combine themselves, it's never explained. It's just like, yeah, sure, that can happen now because it can. Like, no other reason why, just because it can. And the whole advent of making super crack to freaking make people explode. I mean, obviously he didn't know it was going to make people explode, but the fact that it does is just amazing. So yeah, this movie was a lot of fun, honestly. It's got a lot of nudity. Like, there's so much tits and ass that it's insane. But a movie like this, with this kind of premise, of course there's going to be. It'd be more surprising if it wasn't in there, honestly. But it's just a fun, goofy, little Frankenstein type movie. And honestly, if you guys don't know this probably yet, but I love Frankenstein. That's one of my favorite novels. So anytime I get to see some type of interpretation of that, I'm usually happy. I'll admit it. I do like the book version more than any kind of, movie version of Frankenstein, but I digress. It is always fun to see a new take on Frankenstein, or an iteration of it, or something inspired by it. Like, there's a pretty interesting movie, a pretty good movie that I got to see a few months ago, called The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster. It's on Shudder. And it was basically a retelling of Frankenstein, in a sense, where it was a girl who brought back her brother who had been killed by gangbangers. And it was very similar to the whole Frankenstein story, because it was basically the whole thing about, like, bringing him back, but he's not quite right, and she regrets it, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, there's another Frankenstein type movie I want to check out sooner or later, and I may go ahead and review it on here as well. It's called Birth/Rebirth. It apparently just came out, and it's on Shudder, and it's another Frankenstein style movie. and I love those, so I might look at that at some point, because I do want to cover horror movies on this channel as well, on this podcast as well. So that'll be fun, but for now, that's all I've got for you on Frankenhooker. Next time, tune in for the movie Teenage Vampire. That's what we're looking at next time here on Broadcast from Elsewhere. Until then, you can check me out on Twitter at BFE Podcasts for updates and news about the podcast. Anytime if there's a delay or anything like that, I will let you know. We'll also be posting on there about new episodes, and I'll post when an episode is released as well, just in case you don't see it on Spotify, because you can never be too safe. Also be sure to follow me on Spotify and share this podcast with somebody that you know that likes bad media or obscure media, because that is what we cover here. But until next time, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all next time. This is Enigma, signing out.